Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're with us today. So we are going to be talking about all things parenting today. So about resilience and about mindset and gratitude, all the things with Chris Coulter. And he is an amazing guy. He has so much advice and thoughts and wisdom. So I'm so excited to introduce him to you today. With that, let's get to Chris.
Glad to be here.
Okay. So tell us about how we choose to view the events that happen in our life seems to matter. And it matters to you as well as a point that you're trying to educate people on. Can you tell us why and how this has shaped your life?
Well, I think an important part is to understand is how I lost my 14-year-old daughter, Maddie, almost 10 years ago to depression, to suicide. And I guess there are events in kids' lives that will certainly impact them. In my daughter's case, it was going through numerous moves, having her parents separate, and we'll call it a less than amicable separation. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately, she ended up taking her life, and that's the really scary part about parents. Parenting. We want to raise them up. We try to protect them, but not always able to do it. And I think a lot of it comes down to how do kids understand their emotions, and they're not taught about emotions in school, and it's so critically important. And I think it's important also to kind of draw upon some lived experiences that I have. I co-ran a program, a social emotional learning program called How Are You Feeling, which taught kids how to identify, process, and understand their emotions. And the kids that went through that program, they literally said it changed their life in how they understood, how they perceived their emotions. And we put it into a context using popular TV shows and movies. So it takes them out of the hot seat and allows you to empathize and visualize what someone is going through. So understanding the emotions from a different perspective, in a safe perspective. And it was amazing how much those kids that we had about 500 kids ran through the program. They said it literally changed their life. And the interesting thing is 95% of those kids said that the mental health programs that they were participating in school were a waste of time and a complete joke. So that tells you something about the fact that there is a huge need within our education system, a huge opportunity within our education system to be able to get ahead of this storm. Because I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that kids haven't been taught how to understand their emotions. Mm-hmm. A lot of parents don't understand emotions as well. Mm-hmm. And teachers often don't as well, or they're too busy doing other stuff. So that for me is kind of where I think things are so important, and there's huge opportunities for change and change in the system. It comes down to those types of things.
Yeah. Well, first I wanted to say I'm so sorry for the loss of your daughter, Maddie. That is, my heart breaks. Having kids myself, I mean, I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you. And you know what? I feel she is my co-pilot on this adventure. I really do. And
that's amazing.
Everything I do, it has her attached to it. And the beauty of it as well, her younger brothers, my other boys who are now 19 and 22, they also have taken a very active stance with regards to being involved with a lot of these mental and emotional health programs.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, and I, yes, that's so awesome that you're taking this sad loss and that she took her own life and turning it into something that is positively impacting so many people. So thank you for taking that opportunity to take that loss and make something great come from her legacy. I also wanted to just say that, like, I agree with you about the social emotional learning. And oftentimes I know that in my practice, I meet with parents and might be teaching them some skills along with their kids. And the parents might say, like, oh yeah, my kid does talk about their feelings, or they do express them. Or they say, oh, they don't talk about them. They just get upset and have physical outbursts, right? And then I ask the parents, how well would you say that you talk about your emotions? And sometimes there's like crickets, right? Because we can teach what we know, but it's hard to teach something you don't know.
And I think a lot of that starts from a parenting perspective. Vulnerability is not a weakness. Vulnerability is something that exudes strength, and it also creates trust with your child. And by sharing your emotionally vulnerable moments, it creates a landscape for your kids to feel open and natural to share what's going on in their heads as well. Yeah. And that's so important. And it's got to start early, because all of a sudden, it's when the child starts exhibiting bad behavior, if you started that process before it started to show itself, you know what, you might have some better results. And the way to be able to deal with it also changes when kids start to become emotionally dysregulated as well. Sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think people will say to me, like, well, 2-year-olds can't talk about their feelings. And I totally disagree. I think, at my house, my kids have the privilege, maybe the consequence of having a therapist mom. But I think, we talk about feelings all the time. Like, we read a book and I'll be like, what do you think that character is feeling? We were reading a Piggy book. I can't remember, Gerald and Piggy. And those characters have fantastic facial expressions in the books, and like frustrating things. They're problem solving. Like, they're doing a lot of things, even the words are like short and teaching lots of valuable things. But so we read a lot of those books in our house, and I'll be like, oh, what do you think Gerald's feeling? And even my 2-year-old can name them, but not because he just started with that, but because we're practicing as a family, like saying, I'm feeling frustrated. I'm excited. I have joy. I'm disappointed. I am worried. I'm nervous. This scares me. I'm going to be brave. Excuse me. So we're talking about lots of different words, and everybody's doing it. And so then it's normal. But I think if you've never grown up in that type of a setting, for parents, it feels so foreign to talk about it. And yet it's so natural.
And yet many of us, well, I can only speak for myself, but someone from my generation, and you're a little younger than me, Bryce, but we were never taught about stuff like that. We were always taught to push our emotions down. Yeah. And okay, move on, suck it up. That's kind of the nomenclature and the verbiage that parents would typically use on their kids. Yeah. It wasn't encouraged to comfortably emote how you're feeling, and if you're facing a challenge, talking through it. I remember always use your words, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't. I think there needs to be parenting needs to be a natural, emotionally intelligent environment. And I think we're all new at this. Like, if we're going through parenting for the first time, and kids forget, and I think we need to explain it, but we don't always get it right. Yeah. And we're trying to figure this thing out too. And I think the vulnerability of saying that you actually made a mistake, I think that gives a safety net for your child to admit the same.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and I was thinking, like, there's phrases that I use often, like, I'm just one mommy, when I have lots of children asking me for lots of things at one time, to like help set some boundaries of like, I can only do one thing at one time. But also, like, I've never parented you on this day at this age before. Like, I'm still figuring it out. And I've had my kids even, they're my most critical and most supportive teammates at times. But sometimes they'll say, you're a therapist. You should, like, isn't this what you do all day? And I'm like, yeah, it is. Like, and I made a mistake, right? Or like, I didn't handle that well. And going back to say, like, I'm sorry about how that went. Like, I didn't handle my words as well as I wished to, or my patience was running thin. Can we have a do-over? Can you forgive me? How could we do this next time? And I think collaboration as a parenting strategy is key, because our kids can teach us so many things about ourselves, but also them. And they're willing, if we allow them to explain it. And we may not agree with them. I've had my kids explain many of things to me, which I do not feel similarly to their justification. But that doesn't mean that that's not true for them, right? And I don't have the right to dismiss how they feel. But I also don't have to take on their feeling, right? I can also empower them, like, okay, hear how you're feeling. What can we do about this? What choices do we have? Here are some ideas that I have. What ideas do you have? What would you like to do? Because ultimately, and I know this is really frustrating as a parent, I know it can be frustrating for myself, is we really have no control over our kids. Zero. I mean, that doesn't mean that we can't coach and encourage and support and guide. But if we say, don't do this, and they want to do that, they're probably going to do it. Right. And so it's about being on the same team. And so oftentimes I use that vernacular with my kids to say, like, hey, we're on the same team. So when I say, let's not go outside without shoes on when it's 1 degree, there's a reason for that, because I don't want you to get hurt. But like, if you have to experience that for like 1 second, probably you're going to be like, oh yeah, you're right. That's really cold out there and we're not going to die. Right. So sometimes we do have to let our kids make some choices that we don't agree with, obviously keeping safety in mind and those kind of things. But yeah,
well, it's funny. It's like, I don't know what it is. But teenagers, as an example, they love to go in freezing cold weather to school without a jacket.
I know. Yes.
And it drives you nuts. And having okay, you know what? Respect that. To your point, it's like sometimes you got to give in and let these life lessons take over. Say, you know what? You want to go to school without a jacket? No problem. But do me a favor. Maybe you could put a jacket in your knapsack if you happen to get cold. And is it a reasonable request? Sure. And if they fight you, well, you know what? They're likely going to learn a valuable lesson by the time they get home that day.
Yeah.
Or hopefully.
Yeah.
So as long as you're reasonable and respectful, and it's not kind of my way or the highway, it's reasonable too.
Yeah. And I find the more that I'm reasonable, the more that my kids are reasonable. Absolutely. Like if I'm like there are things that I hold the line on, right? Like I can't think of an example right now, but it's like going out after dark. You're a young kid. I'm not going to let you just like go out freely doing whatever, right? I don't let my kids do that in the daytime either. But, that would be like a firm boundary. Or like before you leave the house, you have to notify somebody, right? But, it's like if I'm saying like, hey, if you let me know, I'm happy for you to play with the neighbors as long as we don't have something. You're reasonable. You're explaining your rationale, I think that helps them to understand. And then it helps them because really I think about like my job is to train them to make good decisions in the future. And so if I teach them the thought process, maybe they will pick up on that when I'm like, this is why I was thinking this, or like, we have to leave in 30 minutes. If you go over there, will you be able to leave quickly? Whatever it is, like talking about expectations and then also celebrating when like my daughter is at a friend's house and I say, hey, you can spend 15 minutes, set a timer, then come back. And she does. I'm like, hey, I'm so proud of you. That was awesome. Like that tells me that you're really responsible and I can trust you. And so like emphasizing, excuse me, the ways in which we're succeeding is so critical. And I think they appreciate that. And it's also helping them to feel good about their judgment and their decision making. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, and you want to encourage their own decision making. And yeah, you know what? You may not, as you said, you may not agree with their opinion, but you're respected for actually sharing it. Mm-hmm. And you can then go into why you don't necessarily agree or why your experience shows differently. But it just encourages them to talk up and mm-hmm. to speak. And if you encourage them to speak early, hopefully they'll continue to speak later on, because mm-hmm. it's when it gets silent is where it gets scary.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know one thing, excuse me, that you are working on helping kids to build too is this positive mindset. Why does that matter to you? Or why do you think it's important?
A positive mindset. I think it teaches resilience. It teaches resilience and confidence, which I think, quite frankly, is the biggest thing a lot of kids are challenged by. Aside from having things like mental health challenges, where I see a big issue right now is just encouraging kids to kind of take some chances, feel comfortable to do those types of things themselves, mm-hmm. learn from their mistakes, and encourage them to make mistakes. I think that's the biggest challenge we have right now. Is failure is a bad word. A failure teaches us, and with the old adage, there's two states. There's winning and learning, right? Mm-hmm. And if we encourage kids to try, and if they don't succeed, it's okay. You know what? Just try to figure a different way to do it the next time. Mm-hmm. And encourage failure, but encourage failure for the point of learning. And going back to what I said earlier about, and I know you're a big advocate as well of it, Bryce, but is to celebrate the little wins, celebrate everything, because the one thing that we don't do enough is to encourage the kids to look and see what they've accomplished, yeah. and acknowledge it. And that's how I start all my mentoring sessions. It's like, I want to hear about your best win from last week. And often they'll go, oh, I didn't have any. Well, you know what? I push them on it and I say, I don't believe that for a second. And then mm-hmm. you go through, and then they start to see, oh yeah, I did do this. Mm-hmm. You know what? I did do this too. That's pretty awesome. So yeah. Sometimes they need to take stock of the things that they've accomplished. Mm-hmm. And it's our job to acknowledge it, celebrate it, and let them realize that they did a really good job. And I'm not talking about affirmation this, affirmation that. Mm-hmm. It's just, you know what? That's all part of positive development.
Yeah. Well, and I think confidence ideally is something that is internally derived, right? When we have it externally, outside of ourselves that other people are helping us to determine our confidence, then it is like literally riding a roller coaster. And especially when you're a teen and you're already riding a roller coaster, being on two roller coasters at the same time, can't imagine, right? I'm sure I did definitely do that in my teen years. I didn't have all the words and all the things. And I think the goal is if we can give our kids words and we can be a safe place for them to come to talk about their successes and their failures or the things that didn't go how they imagined, and they can reveal those and we can be like, hey, still love you no matter what. Like that didn't change anything about what I think about you. Like, I'm making mistakes all the time. I mean, I don't want to, but like I'm still growing and I'm 40, right? So if you're younger than that, then you're definitely growing too. And I think as I age, I'm going to still be making mistakes. So I don't think it is ever going to be a perfect life, right? That I'm doing everything perfectly, but it also like you said, you grow so much in those.
And that's what I think you want to encourage kids to fail, because you equate growth to failure. Yeah. And if everything is if you're coddled all the way through your development years and you're not allowed to fall on your face, well, guess what happens when you leave the house? You're just going to continue to fall on your face and not have your kids pick you up or have your parents pick you up.
Yeah. So you don't have the skills. Yeah.
So, yeah, confidence and resilience is a big part of it.
Yeah. What other ways do you think parents can help facilitate that positive mindset? I love the idea of talking about wins and also talking about failures. Is there other things that you feel like parents can do to help their kids build a positive mindset?
I think understanding their emotions, if you take the time to get them to understand the emotions, yes, celebrating the progress. The other thing that's really important, I think, is gratitude. Is showing how grateful you are for them, and that I think is really important. I don't think kids really understand. Yeah, we tell them we love them, but I don't know if they really understand what gratitude truly is. I think the other thing that we can do to help them model a positive mindset is to share stories, be vulnerable. And yeah, I'm not talking about the example where you went in university and you decided to do some crazy stuff. But share stories that might relate to a situation that they may be going to. And I think that is really important to show relatability. It's I went through this. You're going to continue to go through this, and it's not a right or a wrong way to do it. It's just a way, and we just need to understand the impact one way or the other. We got to swerve, or we got to zigzag, or however. But that's all part of life. So making, I think, relatability from storytelling really helps kids. I think to be able to wrap their heads around, hey, you know what? My dad makes mistakes. He makes a lot of mistakes. So I guess I'm allowed to make my fair share of mistakes too.
Yeah. Well, and I think it helps them to keep from hiding things from us too, right? Because I remember like when I maybe didn't do as well on a test, or there was something that I was like, I didn't turn my homework in. And thankfully back when I was in school, parents couldn't just get on a portal and check all those things. But maybe that wasn't for the best. But like, you know, maybe there was something that I didn't do as well as I wanted to. Like there are times where I felt so embarrassed by that. And embarrassment is okay feeling. All of them are fine. It's just what we do with it. I think, you know, it's about being approachable of like, hey, you know, these are the things that have happened to me where like I might have felt this way. And I think pre-planting seeds and kind of watering them of like, hey, these are things that happen. Like my daughter the other day, we were driving. She had gotten braces, so she wasn't at school that day. And so we were going to pick up my other daughter. And she said, what is that stick thing that people are putting in their mouths and has like smoke that comes out of it? And I was like, oh my gosh, we need to talk about vaping, right? She's in second grade. And I was like, this is an important topic. And like, I'm so glad that you asked me that. I think what you saw, I didn't see it, is vaping. And I explained, what it is, why people, because she's like, why would people do that? Like, if it causes cancer, that's crazy. And I'm like, well, this is what teens might think. Here's what I think the reality is. Here's what we know for sure. And I've had cancer. So my kids definitely do not themselves want to go through that process. And so we talked about it. And it's like, I did that one conversation, but that's not the end, right? Like, we've got to keep watering this thing and talking about, like, what do you think? And I said, so with that information, what do you think about that? And she was like, that seems like a horrible idea. And I was like, I agree with you. But sometimes, teenagers try things. And I'm not saying that I want you to, but like, I'd want you to tell me if you did, right? She's in second grade, right? We're at 8, but there's not that many years between 8 and 12, 13, right? Where that is a reality that she'll be exposed to that. And I want her to say like, hey, so-and-so offered this to me in the bathroom or whatever. And for us to be able to have a conversation about that, and for her to feel good about, even if her friends don't support her, her parents would support her, right? Like, she's got a team, but it's hard. This parenting thing, not an easy feat.
No, it's not.
Yes.
It can be very frustrating, but the beauty of it is having those conversations earlier on with your kids. It's a lot easier and accepting than having those conversations much later when they're less inclined to tell you about that stuff. They'll go, because they're going to go to their friends before they're going to go to you first, because that's what happens. The sole parent becomes the go-to person through the tweens and the teenage years, because they got friends that have kind of already figured it out. Or quite frankly, my friends are the ones that mean more to me than anything, right? However right or wrong that mentality might be.
Yeah. Well, somebody's going to educate your kids, and it's either going to be you or somebody else. And that's what I tell parents when they're like, I don't think we're ready to talk about that. And like, here's the deal. Like, you get this opportunity right now before somebody else has done the education to set the narrative and teach them things, or somebody else is going to fill in the gaps. And I don't know about you, but I want to embrace each one of those opportunities that I have to teach my kids something before somebody else tells them something that, teenagers are not always accurate. They have a skewed sense of, reality at times. And it's not that they're wrong, but they may be taught by somebody who also doesn't know the facts. And so then misinformation just gets passed down.
Well, and I think parents have an inherent fear about talking about certain subjects with their kids, thinking that you're going to put the idea in their head.
Yes.
Where it actually has been proven that if you directly ask someone about something, it actually has more of a deterring impact than an encouraging impact.
Yes.
And you can use smoking, you can use drinking, you can use any scenario, but you want your kids to come to you and start asking you those questions, or probably more important, you need to preempt that conversation and why it's so important, because once they've already experienced it, your opinion doesn't mean as much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think also with suicide, that's one of the things that I think parents are often the most scared to talk about, because they don't want that to happen. And so then they're like, well, let's not talk about it. But the reality is that it's being talked about. And so, you asking the question directly, if your kid is not thinking about suicide, they're going to say no. But if they are, it's going to be an open space for them to consider. Or there have been times where, even in my practice, I've asked a kid, are you thinking about suicide, killing yourself? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? And sometimes they say no, but then the next time they'll come back and say, you asked me something and I want to change my answer. And I think that's the best that we can do, is to have a direct conversation to say like, hey, I'm open to this. You're not alone in this. I want to talk about this if this is on your mind.
Well, and the scary part about it is the age in which these kids are asking these questions or thinking these thoughts is becoming earlier and earlier.
Yeah.
So once upon a time, an 8, 9, 10-year-old, like, there's no way in hell that this would actually, like your 8, 9, or 10-year-old would ask you about suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And if so, we would probably be quick to, why do you want to know about that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more conversations we can stop fearing, the better we are preparing our kids for their teenage years and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Totally agree. Yeah. Because it doesn't get easy, or it doesn't get easier. Yeah. It gets harder, right? As the years go on and the problems that they're faced with are more complex. And so we want to.
Sorry, Bryce.
No, you go ahead.
And the fact is, they stop talking
mm-hmm.
as well. So better to encourage it when they are asking questions, because when they're only thinking it and not sharing, then the outcome may be very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so a topic, excuse me, you've been trying to bring attention to also is about the space between parents and therapists. And obviously I'm in the therapist zone and the parent zone, but there is a space between that, and how this can be a zone of growth. Can you talk more about this?
Yeah, it's something I like to refer to as the thriving zone. So as where most parents kind of look at the thriving zone as the one where your teenager starts pushing back and starts challenging you on things. And that's where the real contention comes between parents and kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not suggesting that I think there are very few parents that can actually have that mentoring conversation as a parent, because unfortunately, even the most emotionally intelligent parents, they're still, when you put on that parenting hat, for some people, there still needs to be that punitive element.
Mm-hmm.
And all right, well, consequences need to take place as a deterrent. So I think early on, we learn of sharing information or consequences as a negative thing. And I think parents have to, it's not to say that there shouldn't be consequences, but how we go about consequences have to be a little different as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think if a kid says, I tried smoking with a friend of mine, the reaction isn't usually, oh, you know what? Thank you for sharing that with me. Mm-hmm. It becomes more of a punitive approach. Mm-hmm. And I think when parents start saying thank you for sharing them, and you know what? I'm sure that wasn't an easy thing to broach with me or your mother. But thank you for doing it. And then opening up a conversation with them. And I think we're too quick to put on our punitive hat. Mm-hmm. And then that's where kids go in a different direction. They go, there's consequences. I don't want to face those consequences. Therefore, I will not share that information with my parent.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you talk about how do we do that? I mean, how do we slow that down of, our kid says they did something we disapprove of, and maybe we've told them we disapprove of that. Maybe this is the first they're hearing about it, but how do we do that conversation? Because I think that's where parents need help. Is they're I want my kid to talk more, but I also feel like this is my responsibility to make sure they become this good human, and this is a bad behavior.
Yeah, in some cases, the parent will be able to have those conversations. In other cases, it may require an outside third party. Could be a family friend. Yeah. I don't know. The dynamic between kids and their parents can be a little challenging sometimes.
Sure.
And perhaps it's a sports coach or a close teacher, a family friend, an older teen who might be 4 or 5 years more advanced than your child. I think those are really important conversations if the parent can't have them. And I think the big challenge is is just encouraging when they start pushing back a little bit, start flexing their muscles, start showing some autonomy and independence. You can go one of two ways. The conflict, there's either an inherent conflict that's going to start to exist between parents and their teens. That's where the frustration level starts to hit this all-time high.
Yeah.
And parents, this sweet little kid has been just that for the last number of years. What happened? All of a sudden, they're challenging me. They're pushing back. They're being more influenced by their friends. I think that if we either we learn to talk to them in less of a punitive approach, or we have a third party, it could be a therapist, but someone who is emotionally intelligent. I'd like to think there's a line between when our kids start developing and then where our kids have emotional and mental health issues.
Sure.
So whether that's anxiety or depression, whatever the situation is, I think we just need to be able to we need to be able to talk openly and honestly, or have a mentor or family friend or someone that can help to ease that transition from child to adolescent.
Yeah.
And I think there's a tremendous opportunity there for growth and to be able to usurp the entire teenage hell years, if you call them that, because I think there's a great opportunity for growth for you as a parent, but also for your child as a growing and developing teen or soon to be.
Yeah. Well, and I think something I was thinking as you're saying that is like setting those up ahead of time, right? To be like, hey, here's 5 people that you can go to. Like if you have something you don't want to talk to me about, even if they're 7, right? It's like you have this aunt, you have this grandparent, you have this friend's mom, you have this teacher, right? Like talking to the kid about this and letting those people that your family has identified as like support people, to also know and say like, yes, I accept this role, and to have kind of some privacy between that of like, hey, if my kid's saying something that concerns you, let me know. But if it's something that seems just like normal development, right? And you obviously trust this person, it's not something you don't trust, to like keep it between yourselves. And I have that relationship with my niece of like, she comes to me and will be like sometimes complaining about her parents or frustrated about something or struggling with something. And I'll like ask her, like, am I listening or am I helping? Like, is this solving or just listening to what's going on? And she'll identify that for me. And then we work through it. Sometimes she just wants to complain. Okay, cool. I'm here.
Yeah. And you bring up a really important point too, Bryce. I think parents tend to jump into fix-it mode automatically. I think the important thing for a lot of parents to recognize your kids just want to be heard. They don't want to be fixed. They'll figure out how to process that information and develop their own strategy if you allow them to. But the problem is so many parents just immediately jump into fix-it mode. Oh, this has happened to me, and this is what happened, and blah, 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 blah. And kids, it's lost on them. They want to feel validated. They don't want to be told. And it's a deeply personal thing for them to open up and share. And all of a sudden, a lot of parents kind of jump in and they go, okay, we got this. This is how we're going to make you all better. And it's not what they need.
Yeah.
In some cases, it's just what they wanted to share. And we lose that growth opportunity. We make it more about us and less about them.
Yeah. I remember you saying that reminds me of a time, and I don't even remember what the situation was, but I was a teenager and I was telling my mom something and she was like trying to fix it. And I was like, I just want to make my own mistakes. Like, I just want to live my own life. And I know she was trying to be helpful, but like, I was so frustrated about how she was approaching it, and she just didn't have the skills. Like, she didn't know. I mean, she was a great mom, but she just didn't know how to do that part of like, she wanted me to have my best life. And so by me revealing something to her, she wanted to jump in and fix it, which I think is so normal for parents. And sometimes I find myself jumping in before somebody's like finished, like, oh, I know how to solve this. Right. And I'm like, okay, Bryce, hold it back. Right. Like, calm it down. We got this. Like, we can just listen. But it's hard as a parent. As a therapist, I do a really excellent job listening. I can listen to all day, right? Like, I can help where help's needed and those boundaries. But when it's our own kids, sometimes that's really can be hard. So I appreciate that difficulty as well.
Yep, totally.
Yeah. Okay. So what would you, if obviously our audience is generally parents, but sometimes we have some teen listeners too. But what would you want to say to parents, like taking away from this conversation about like raising kids and helping them to be the best versions of themselves? What do you want parents to know or take away?
I think probably the listening thing is really important.
Mm-hmm.
The listening and fixing, just try to spend one-on-one time as well. We talked about, I guess, before we went on air about how different our kids are compared to one another, compared to each other. And you know what? One, it might be, hey, watching a movie with and just kind of chilling, and sometimes they openly and naturally open up on something like that. Another one might be going out for a coffee and just catching up. I think it's taking the time for your individual kids that's really important, because they have individual styles and that they're going to grow up differently. Their perception and reality of the world is going to be different than the next one. And then birthing order has a different thing, right?
Yes.
So that's probably an entire different topic on its own. But I think parents are trying to be perfect. And the problem with that is it's impossible. Stop trying to be perfect and acknowledge that to your kids, that you don't have the answer. And you go, you know what? I don't have the answer, but let's try to figure it out together. And just taking that collaborative approach, it inherently builds trust. And your kid feels less like I can't believe I went to my dad for this. All he did is made me feel like an idiot, as opposed to working through the problem. And you know what? You may or may not come up with an ultimate solution, but at least you haven't told them that this is the way you need to fix it. Part of that is figuring it out on their own as well, and making sure that to let them know that mistakes are natural, and that's how you grow.
Yeah. I love the idea of like coming up with a solution to your kid and then saying like, hey, if this doesn't go as planned, let's come back to the drawing board and figure out what we could do next. Right. There's lots of ideas that we could do here. Right. Like I like that you picked this idea. Let's go forward with it. And it's not like we can't present like, hey, have you thought about this as a challenge, or what would you do if this happened? I think, it's not challenging them too much, but also giving space to say like, you might think about these things as well. And maybe not even ask for their feedback, but then you could follow up on it, right? There's so many ways to do this, but I think letting them make decisions, practicing making mistakes, because I am still making mistakes as a grown-up. So like, they're going to make them too. And we want them to kind of we're kind of the training wheels, right? Like, we're helping them to just support in that part of like, because you can ride the bike with training wheels and be in the middle, right? Like, you can still not need the actual training wheels, but like, they need us to kind of be their guardrails, right? To kind of help keep them in that space. But there's so much space between the guardrails. And sometimes we find that we're asking for like one option when there's hundreds, because we know that lots of people are doing life lots of different ways.
And that's another important lesson, that there's more than one way to kind of figure this out and come up with a solution. And it just isn't one way. And I think that's the problem with our education system. It is a right or wrong answer. And life isn't. And when I just think, which once again, we're going down this rabbit hole, that the challenges with schools and our curriculum and the whole bit, I think the way our kids are raised is counterproductive to building smart, empathetic, kind kids, because we're taught it's one way, that's the only answer we'll accept. And you know what? Once you come to the understanding, we're right and that answer is wrong, it doesn't lend itself to a great growth.
Yeah.
Especially when you're celebrating perfection as opposed to just participation or just trying your best.
Yep. There's so many things that just came to my mind, but I'll resist going down that part, but I totally agree with you. Okay. So if you could give advice directly to teens, what would you want them to take away or think about?
I probably first by starting, your parents are what you think of your parents when you go to them for help and they try to fix your problem. Understand that there is probably not a more invested group that wants your success than your parents. They just don't know how to give it sometimes. And if that's the case, understand that your parents aren't always your source of inspiration or source of education. There's lots of other people that you can talk to. Telling kids to make a lot of mistakes, but the most important mistake you make from, or most important mistake is the one you learn from. And you change and course correct and realize, you know what, that mistake is going to prove all sorts of great dividends down the road, provided you apply it. I said, I have no problem when you make a mistake, just don't make it twice. Yeah. And I think if kids understand that there's kind of that forgiveness element and that mistakes are a natural part of life and you will continue to make them, you and I are going to continue to make them throughout, but making mistakes is also an indication of growth. Right? And unfortunately, too many times, mistakes has too much of a negative connotation and not enough of a positive consequence, because we're already celebrating. That wouldn't be something that we would consider a celebratable offense or mistake. If celebratable is even a word.
It is now. It has become a word. Okay. Yes. Yes. The School of Parenting by Chris Coulter. Yes. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been such an awesome conversation.
I'm happy to have joined you, and I enjoyed myself thoroughly. So anytime, Bryce.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Chris. As promised, you provided lots of amazing information. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you so much for your time, for being here, for doing your best to raise healthy humans. With that, I will say, have a fantastic day. But before you go, please like and subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. With that, have an amazing day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.